Through the keyhole once again. Before that, here's the final programme in the series, Marching as to War.
Hello. For the last programme in our series, we've come to Sunbury-on-Thames. This fine Georgian mansion is where the Salvation Army elects its generals. Our story has been about the first general and founder, William Booth. He knew poverty as a 13-year-old pawnbroker's apprentice in Nottingham, and for 60 years as an evangelist, his main concern was for the poorest of the poor. And yet, the rich and famous were proud to know him. Empire builders like Cecil Rhodes, the Rothschilds, the young Winston Churchill. In 1898, President Theodore Roosevelt invited him to open the United States Senate with a prayer. And King Edward VII asked to meet him. Now, Booth insisted on walking to Buckingham Palace after washing his hands in a workman's pail. So, no matter what the company, he never lost the common touch, and he always gave the glory to God.
Hallelujah, glory to God. Hallelujah, glory to God. We have honor to forgive. Glory to God. Now we're on our way to heaven. Glory to God. Come and join our happy flag. Glory to God. Running to the promised land. Glory to God. Hallelujah, glory to God. Hallelujah, hallelujah. When is now the good Elijah? When is now the good Elijah? When is now the good Elijah? Take me the promised land.
William Booth makes nonsense of the theory that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. At 75, he was not too old to realize the value of the latest technology. The motor car offered a brand new way of meeting the people. The first of his 7 motorcade tours took place in 1904 and lasted a month. 6 cars bucketed 1,200 miles across England with the general in a red-wheeled Napier. There were those who said it cheapened the gospel, but it caught the public imagination. Crowds stormed to hear him. Despite 6, 7 or more meetings each day, the old man kept going. Which wasn't always true of the cars. All right, ride on to glory, but what about us? He also saw the virtues of the cinematograph. On tour in the USA, the general wrote as many as 35 articles a day. Mind you, if you have a secretary like Fred Cox here, who'd get out of bed at 4 in the morning to take dictation, it helps. Fred had 43 pockets in his uniform. Whatever the general needed, lozenges for the throat or a spare set of dentures, it was there in one of Fred's pockets. Another great support was his daughter Evangeline, at that time national commander in the United States, who later became the Army's 4th general. Booth traveled the world, to South America, the Far East and Japan. En route to Australia, he stopped off in the Holy Land and was rowed ashore at Jaffa. He saw many places familiar to him from his reading of the Bible and knelt to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus prayed the night before he died. He climbed Mount Calvary where Christ was crucified and read a manifesto calling on all who named the name of Christ to make a desperate effort for the salvation of a lost world. Just how much that effort was needed was revealed in 1914, 2 years after his death, when the world plunged into a bloody and terrifying war. 2 world wars were to show that wherever the need, whatever the danger, the Salvation Army would be there. Tens of thousands of servicemen and women still remember the red shield on its mobile canteens with affection. American lasses won a reputation for doughnuts cooked under battle conditions, but the majority by far declared there was nothing like an army cup of tea.
I've never been what you might call religious. All them hymns and prayers have no effect on me. But when it comes to chant, that's a different tale by far. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. There's nothing like an army cup of tea. They produce it on the spot, from Hong Kong to Aldershot. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. When I was lost out there in the Sahara, I was out there as a soldier boy, you see. The Red Shield band drove up and they offered me a cup. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. There's nothing like an army cup of tea. They produce it on the spot, from Hong Kong to Aldershot. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. Of course you can't rely on every rumour. When the Sally Ann was graced by royalty. She was overheard to say, as they brought him on a tray, oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. There's nothing like an army cup of tea. They produce it on the spot, from Hong Kong to Aldershot. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. There's nothing like an army cup of tea. They produce it on the spot, from Hong Kong to Aldershot. Oh, there's nothing like an army cup of tea. There's nothing, 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 nothing. Nothing in this old wild world like a nice, hot, strong, psychedelic army cup of tea.
The public view of William Booth was one thing, but how did his family see him? At their Berkshire home, his 2 granddaughters, Olive and Dora, both in their 90s, had this to say.
Our grandfather, he was, considering, I think, the busy man he was, but whenever he was at home, he took notice of us. Of course, we remember him when he was fairly old, but we never called him grandfather, we always called him the General. And he always got a salute out of us. He loved that.
we stood, or at least I stood, in great awe of him.
Yes, we did a bit.
Frightened the life out of me, for fear you displeased it. He was that sort of a man. He wasn't easy with you, I don't think. He was kind, but he jumped on you rather. But otherwise, he was all out to get us to help him. He was always interested in what you did at the local corps. How did you get on?
Even when we were really
Sunday?
quite children, he'd ask you, did you go to the meeting and what did they do and so on.
But when you
were quite
think what
small.
he had on his mind, I mean, the growing army, the great concern, all the problems, I think he was wonderful.
We were 7, you know, at home, when we were small, really small. Catherine hadn't left. We always went to sing carols to him, and one Christmas morning, there must have been something extra thrilling in the stocking. We forgot all about him till we heard a terrific voice down below and banging on the top of the radiators like that and saying, "Christians awake and greet the happy born." And we were all paralyzed.
Another thing he did for the young people, which I think was very thoughtful, he had an annual meeting for all children of officers.
And on one occasion we acted for them, we did something. We all dressed up in different countries.
The costume
Costume of the different countries, and passed him on the platform saying, "Come and help us," you know.
Then he made a great appeal, you see. "I need your help. Grow up and come and help me." Well, I think an appeal like that can have a great impression when you're 11, 10, 13, 14. It's an appeal that lives with you. At any rate, I think it did with me. Yes, it's a case of it did with me.
Olive and Dora's uncle Herbert, the General's youngest son, made a very significant contribution to army music. Here's one of his best-known songs, "At the Cross Where I First Saw the Light." For an outsider's view of the Salvation Army, I've come to talk to the Bishop of Manchester, the Right Reverend Stanley Booth Clibborn.
Well, I'm not quite an outsider, Roy. After all, although the old general died 12 years before I was born, I did know his eldest daughter, Catherine, or Kate, very well, because she was my grandmother.
But it was unfortunate towards the end. Your grandmother actually had a rift with William Booth, didn't she?
Yes, this was very tragic, really. In fact, three of the most brilliant of William Booth's children, including my grandmother, left the army because they couldn't agree with the discipline and the way in which it was being run, and it was a matter of very great sadness. He believed that as far as being a father was concerned, he was General of the Salvation Army first, and he was a father second, and that what applied to the officers and soldiers of the Salvation Army ought to apply to his family just as much.
I believe he was rather difficult to live with.
He was a difficult man to live with, some would say almost impossible. But I think this has been true for many of the greatest saints in the Christian church down through history. And it's one of the wonderful things about the Christian gospel and the Christian church, that God can work through men and women who are very far from perfect.
What do you think William Booth really did for Christianity?
Well, first and foremost, I would put the fact that he always believed that action must go along with faith. He took the words of Jesus that men and women do not live by bread alone seriously, in the sense that there must be a spiritual dimension, and evangelism was important. But he also took the words of Jesus about the need for people to have bread, to have decent conditions for their lives seriously as well. And that's been a very important contribution in Christian history. And then secondly, I would say that the way in which William Booth reached out to the poorest and most marginalized in society was very important in the conditions of his time. And it's something which is a constant lesson to the churches. In fact, in our own Church of England, we're trying to follow this message of the Christian gospel through our Faith in the City report, which cares for people in our urban priority areas, in our great cities and urban areas. And then thirdly, it's back to what we were talking about. I would say the equality given to women in ministry along with men was a very important lesson of the army in its early days. And of course, in the Church of England, we're really still wrestling with this one over the ordination of women to the priesthood. So I believe that was another great contribution of William Booth.
William Booth's last public appearance was in May 1912 at the Albert Hall. He was 83. He'd already lost one eye and was awaiting surgery on the other, and would shortly go completely blind. The old warrior was undaunted.
I have to tell you that I'm like an old ship going into dry dock for repairs. But never forget, while women weep as they do now, I'll fight. While little children go hungry, or as they do now, I'll fight. While men go to prison, in and out, I'll fight. While there's a drunkard left, while there's a poor, lost girl upon the streets, while there remains one dark soul without the light of God, I'll fight. I'll fight to the very end.
"7,000 Salvationists acclaimed him and sang the song that he himself had written, O Boundless Salvation." Three months later, his earthly fight was ended, and the general laid down his sword. Now the people gave their verdict on his life and work. 140,000 attended his lying in state. 40,000 people attended his funeral service, and crowds 15 deep lined the pavements. At the Mansion House, where Booth had been made a freeman of the City of London, the Lord Mayor saluted the coffin. 10,000 Salvationists marched in procession, and the flags were carried of more than 50 nations where the army was at work. The future Queen Mary attended the funeral unannounced and saw a one-time prostitute cast a rose on the coffin as it passed, saying, "He cared for the likes of us." Booth had founded an army, but what of the future? I asked General Eva Burrows about signs of hope. Is the Salvation Army still growing?
Oh yes, you know, in many parts of the world it's amazing. In fact, in East Africa it's growing so fast we can hardly hold on to it. And I was there just recently and they had a big Salvation Army march, all these Salvationists in white uniform, immaculate, thousands of them. And I'm standing up saluting for nearly an hour when suddenly I felt a hand under my arm holding me up, and I looked down, it was the black hand of the Salvation Army African leader saying, "I'm helping you, General." But it's very thrilling. Zimbabwe, unbelievable. Korea, well, really, the Salvation Army has doubled its size in the last 10 years. In many parts of the Third World, we are growing very rapidly. In Europe, the Salvation Army is like the main churches, going through a period of difficulty. But I believe we're seeing some of the embers of the fire really catching light now. I believe we're going to see a swing in Europe and in Britain. And when some people say the Salvation Army is just a social organization, I have to correct them. They make the same mistakes about Jesus Christ. When you say to people, "Who's Jesus Christ?" they say, "Well, he was such a wonderful man. He fed the hungry. He made the blind see. He was a noble example to follow." But they've missed the whole point. Jesus Christ came to reveal sin and show man a way to be reconciled to God. So that's our great point, be reconciled to God.
If William Booth were here today, what would he say to the army?
Well, I often get asked that question, you know, if William Booth came. I think he'd say, he would not say to us, "Are you doing what I used to do?" I think he would come and say, "Have you got that same dynamic spirit, that spirit of aggression that's prepared to go out and invite people to come into a knowledge of Jesus Christ?" Sure, I think in some ways the Salvation Army doesn't attract people as it did in its earliest days because we're in an entirely different social climate. But I think the Salvation Army has got his spirit, and evangelism is our prime objective. And I think he'd say to me, "Go on, girl, keep at it."
Keep at it with gladness. Capture the mood and spirit of your day, but don't be led by it. Transform it. Use what it offers to bring the message of Jesus Christ alive to all people wherever they are. We end where we began, here in Nottingham. The house where William Booth was born in 1829 is now a museum, but just a small part of a large modern complex which takes care of the elderly and helps the homeless and their families to learn how to face the future. But what typifies more than anything, I think, the spirit of William Booth is this emergency unit. It stands ready 24 hours a day, fully equipped for a mercy dash to a pile-up on a motorway, a rail crash, fire, flood, or any other disaster. For William Booth, the greatest disaster was a world that did not know its God. His response was immediate and urgent. All those who marched with him in his army and knew the love of God in their hearts must tell the world what they knew and show his love in action.